What is up, Generals? We are back with Ultimate General Civil War, and this is the J&P Rebalance Major General Legendary Campaign. As you can see, we're picking up right in the middle of Shiloh, and this is going to be where the last video ended off. The first thing I want to do is I want to kind of apologize for the delay from the one video to the next. I'm being slammed at work. It's a very good problem to have, but it probably means I'm a little overcommitted. And I like to keep this once a week. I like to keep putting something out once a week. Regularity is, in my mind, the kind of thing that a viewer base can properly be built off of. So it's once a week is generally something I try and really hold myself to. And anyway, just I'm sorry. And I know we talk all the time about how real life happens and real life matters and all that kind of stuff. So you get it and I get it, and I'm not ever saying that I would pick this over work or anything silly like that, but at the same time it does, I think, need to be talked about. So one of the benefits or the upshots of that situation is that I played this battle out on the recording date is August 8th, so I played this damn near 2 weeks ago, and it makes sense because it took me about a week-ish to record the commentary for day one. And the day one video gives you a pretty good template for how to approach Shiloh generally as a Confederate, but especially in legendary difficulty, and doubly so in the rebalance mod. And the reason I say that is the lethality of units armed with 1842s in the vanilla game is pretty good. It's okay. So you can get a lot of work out of these units in the vanilla game that, to my perception, you just can't out of the rebalance mod. And it forces me as a player. So this is one of the things I think is exciting about the battle, the changes. And believe me, I know I bitched a lot in the last video. I was salty, I was frustrated, I was a lot of things. At the same time, so while I think that there is room for a balanced pass or a balanced tweak on this battle, I will also say it was fun. I was engaged. And in the same way as I was talking earlier about, I believe this was during Stay Alert. I think I talked in the video there about how, as much as I was frustrated at the losses I was taking, I was also deeply engaged in every second of the battle. And that is a battle that, if you're not careful, has a great deal of risk of turning into just kind of, in place your dudes and then just kind of let the math grind itself out, and then that's all she wrote, right? So the benefit of the fact that I'm not doing this commentary kind of fresh is that I'm kind of discovering this with you. Like, I vaguely remember the broad strokes of what I did and all that kind of stuff, but the specific motivation or the specific fears I had associated with certain actions, I don't remember. So with all that kind of ancillary stuff out of the way, let's jump into the fighting. So the first two phases, the morning of 6 April 1862, saw a Confederate force under, I believe, still Brigadier General Legendary Fiasco, the awkwardly named Brigadier General Legendary Fiasco, engage Union forces, surprise for the most part, around Union or Shiloh Church. An enlarged Union picket to the south of the church was the first sort of warning sign of an impending Confederate attack. And around, I want to say 8-ish in the morning, Union soldiers, sleepy in their tents, encamped in and around Shiloh Church on the north side of whatever the hell river this is, discovered massed ranks of Confederate soldiers approaching on the right side of the screen here, which I presume is probably also south and east of their position. I'm assuming that this screen is more or less aligned with cardinal north, but hell if I know, dude. Simultaneously, on the right of the screen, although frankly, as far as this is concerned, it'll end up being basically right in the center of the Union position, Confederate forces under the AI general, whose name I don't remember, Beauregard, maybe? Butler? I don't remember. It doesn't matter. Engaged Union forces in and around the Spanish field. And there, those troops displayed a much higher grade of aggression when compared to the forces under legendary Fiasco. So what those two forces ultimately worked on doing is driving a wedge in the middle of the Confederate position, the Union position, and in placing themselves as self-supporting bulwarks against either position. What's happening here on the screen is the fighting in and around noon and 1 on into the evening hours of 6 April 1862. So as you can see, Confederate forces have largely cut off and enveloped the Union troops in and around Shiloh Church. They are taking losses in the process, but General Grant has been cut off from supporting his troops. Confederate infantry has largely boxed Grant and his bodyguard in, and is preventing him from supporting those beleaguered defenders in and around the church. However, Grant's bodyguard, dogged in its resistance, has held position at that crossroads there until massed volleys from 2nd Infantry and 5th Infantry eventually lay low all 260 some odd men associated with that group. My forces are arrayed here in an attempt to force the Union away from the church and away from the good defensive terrain. The dream that I failed to properly actualize was to get them into that swampy terrain, to retreat basically north and west into that swampy terrain where 2nd and 9th Infantries are currently moving. When I realized that they weren't going to retreat in that direction, but they were instead going to retreat into the river, essentially swapping positions with the Confederate command, I took the opportunity then to push them into the river and get as many kills as I could. Cycle route them, and then hopefully get them to bug out in the river. Now, admittedly, this is me gaming the AI and everything else, but I'm really not going to apologize for that. It's legendary. You got to use every trick in the book. The Union force is bracketed pretty much by from every side, with the exception of south and west. So they do have a safe angle of retreat. However, that safe angle of retreat is in the wrong direction. So if we extrapolate the events happening on the screen out into the broader real world, their lines of supply are north and east of their current position. Their route home is north and east of their current position. The Navy, their food, their other troops, supporting troops, are all north and east of their position, so they're cut off. The only option for them is to advance unsupported, without any supplies and anything else, deeper into Confederate territory or Confederate-controlled territory and behind Confederate lines. A force this large does, in fact, constitute a significant threat to the rear of Confederate lines. But if they want to have any chance of artillery or cavalry or medical or logistical support of any kind whatsoever, they have to go north and east. And the AI is doing that here with the knowledge, I think, that probably what's happening is the flag at Shiloh Church is drawing them to attack. I move my forces to interpose myself between them where they're at and where they're going to attack. And honestly, here I basically employ the exact same strategy that the Union player does in the initial defense of Shiloh. When you're playing as the Union on this battle, I basically put myself in exactly the same positions that I would as a Union player, but I do it with the benefit or bonus of excellent Confederate troops, and in placing units like 1st Rifles and 3rd Infantry directly in front of the Union troops advancing uphill in the open out of a river with supporting fires from 2nd to the Confederate right. I have 10th and a couple other units in a spoiling position We should talk about Peabody and the units that were down there fighting with him. That whole situation turned into a giant snafu, and it was just mismanaged by me. I really have to kind of own that whole thing. I will also own my frustration over the fact that Peabody routed in a direction that doesn't make sense. Logically, Peabody was able to just launch himself like some sort of starfighter over these lines. I have a million frustrations from the first video regarding Peabody's attack, and it is what it is. But the defense against Peabody should have been fairly textbook. It should have been something that I could handle. And I honestly, in the rigmarole of the battle itself, I either lost sight of what was happening with Peabody, or I'm pretty sure I know what happened. So Union troops begin to shatter under mass volleys on the river. Cohesion falls apart, and the Union command begins to fall to pieces. Units start retreating away from the superior in an unattackable Confederate position, especially because they lack artillery support at this juncture. And they retreat to what they think is safety in the east, which was where the remainder of the Union command is thought to be holding the line against aggressive Confederate troops. The sound of musket fire and artillery and cavalry and the clanging of sabers must almost certainly be drawing Union attention to the right. And they can't know. Oh, excuse me. These troops can't know that their allies, their erstwhile buddies, compatriots, have already been displaced in and around Spanish Church, or Spanish Field. So let's go take a look what's going on that side of the battlefield when the battle transitions. So Breckinridge, yep, I totally knew that, or Breckinridge and Bragg. I absolutely knew it was a B word. That's why I tried to say Beauregard and Butler, but neither of those names is even close to being right. Beauregard, or General Bragg, I think is the larger of the two generals, I don't know which one of these two is the one that's in charge. I've heard of Bragg before, but I've also heard of Breckinridge. So usually when I look at these AI generals, I can just kind of be like, the one I've heard of is probably the more important one. It's not always a good way to look at it, but so it looks like Bragg is the larger. So General Bragg, with his beleaguered Confederate command, predominantly composed of experienced, as far as I can tell, experienced grenadiers. These guys are pretty much good for one thing and one thing only. That's standing, taking volleys, and charging in melee. Bragg realizes the Hornet's Nest is going to be a tough nut to crack, and decides instead to support the broader Confederate advance, the real objective, Pittsburgh Landing. The Hornet's Nest represents nothing more than a distraction, a hard point that generals in the future will use as one of their primary arguments when they start developing the doctrine of blitzkrieg. Bypass the hard points. Don't go through them. Go around them. Bragg, in this instance, realizes that and decides instead the real objective is the soft, gooey center in the Union rear. And if he can bypass the heavily defended Hornet's Nest and then block them from supporting attacking Confederate infantry under legendary Fiasco, Bragg can effectively take out a huge portion of the Union command from the battle. Under Bragg's estimation, you don't need to kill the enemy to nullify his effect on the battlefield. Absolutely, if one can annihilate the opposing force, clearly you can achieve your battlefield goals. But through maneuver and blocking tactics and everything else, you can accomplish much the same objective if the goal is territorial control or the goal is control of logistics. In this particular instance, controlling Pittsburgh Landing cuts off the entirety of this army from Union support and prevents them from resupplying, rearming, removing wounded, getting mail, getting other support, and forces the Union into launching another attack, committing more gunboats to the region and committing more troops, which at this point in time historically they do have, but not in the kind of major numerical disparity that they do later in the war. All of this means that you don't need to kill all of these soldiers. And frankly, from a play point or a play note out of character, it's practically impossible to accomplish a full clear on this map, and that should not be your objective as a player. So Bragg maneuvers his forces and uses these trees here as cover, treats this position as a defensive bulwark, engages the Union on a wide, broad front, which, given the scope and size of his command, actually is good for him, is good for what he's trying to accomplish. He wheels as many of his troops as possible north of the Union position. Now, on a play note, I screw this up. I pushed too many forces north of the Hornet's Nest too early, and I transitioned the time, I transitioned the phase way earlier than I planned on. I wanted the full 4 hours to fight this out. I wanted to destroy as many Union units as possible. I wanted to bait them into suicide charges. I wanted to use my supply wagon that is mostly empty at this point anyway, to bait them into launching these charges against my line. Because look, now that my dudes are mostly in position, they're well supported with artillery. Yes, it's shit artillery, and they're in good cover. So yeah, their firearm stats not great, and their gun is also, charitably speaking, subpar. But the terrain is massively in my advantage. Here's the problem, though. I think, and I've seen in comments, I think Panda's talked a couple times about when he starts pushing the north edge of the map, the game kind of has a soft, the game triggers onto the next phase, where it almost treats it like you had captured the Hornet's Nest, just in terms of like the phase change, not anything else. And so that's a problem, because my guys, a lot of them ran to get into position, and so I kind of flip out here, and there's a part of me that like debates possibly like restarting or going back or something. So I go through kind of a moment here, and I'm like, shit, what do I do? And I save. Let's just see, this is a long battle, right? Like, there's a lot of video left. If you're looking at the timestamp on the video, there's plenty of video left. So I save it because, man, what if I want to go to bed? What if I fuck it up, right? So I'm not happy with the fact that I transitioned this early. My guys are tired on the right, and the Union is probably also a little tired on the right. But more importantly, I haven't had the opportunity to really degrade or wear down their troops. So that being said, though, I commit to the strategy because I think it's still kind of a good idea, even if maybe I haven't had enough time to implement it correctly. And so Bragg's command still seeks to interpose itself against the Union right. Well, sorry, I guess from the Union perspective, that's going to be the left. It seeks to sort of hold on the right and allow Confederate forces to punch on the left. One tiny, huge boon for me as a player is that when you advance the timeline, I guess some of the Union reinforcements that come in north of the map are timed chronologically, not on phase change. So when I played this battle in a lot of my previous iterations, I fight the full 4 hours on the right, and then the phase changes, and then the map opens up, and they say, hey, go take the landing. And I try to, and as soon as I get my leading edge troops there, my cordon and security guys, my Grenzers and Grenadiers and that kind of shit, as soon as I get there, almost immediately a corps of, well, that's not a corps, it's like a division, it's like a big division, a division of Union troops teleport from the fucking Enterprise from the top of the map. And interestingly, that doesn't happen here in the same time frame. They take much longer to show up. And so I don't know if the coded trigger for these units to show up is a certain preponderance of Union or Confederate troops in the area, or if it's if the trigger is the Confederates take the flag or what. But I'm metagaming a little bit, and then I know there's going to be a significant force of Union troops who appear on that road. And let's just say I've got cavalry who are doing recon and they're not engaged in the actual fight. And I get a messenger that says like, hey, there's a division of Union troops coming down this road. And then there's also a division of Union troops coming down that road. And I also know that about a day's march plus away is an entire... is it like a full corps? Probably not. But maybe it's a small corps. Grant's troops. Well, Grant's here, but Grant's troops, the guys who showed up historically on day 2 and turned this battle into a Union victory, they're about a day's plus march away. So I've gotten all these messenger reports and everything else, and I know if I'm going to do this, I got to do it now. As a player, I know if I'm going to do this, I got to do it now. And real world, I think the generals at the time knew if they're going to do this, they've got to do it now. So all of this stuff kind of lines up, and I approach the artillery here kind of trying to gun them out. So the thought process is that, to my perception, right, wrong, or indifferent, and whether or not it's accurate from a mechanics perspective, my perception is that units who are in trenches seem to take morale damage from flank fire at a much higher rate than a similar number of troops would in open deployment. I don't know why that is. And it's just what I've noticed. So whether it's right or wrong, I don't know. I try to put enough firepower into Powell and the other artillery unit. I can't read it on my screen, but it kind of looks like Silverton. It's totally not, but... is that really Shakespeare? Whatever. The 2 artillery units up here by Pittsburgh Landing, those guys, whoever the hell they are. I try and put firepower into them because I want to white shield them and I want to get those units out of the area ASAP. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way, and I launch myself into a charge with the hope, the dream, whatever, of wiping out these units, so that the only artillery I have to worry about is that of the ironclads in the river. Well, it doesn't work out that way. I do manage to wipe Powell, I think, but we're not able to get Silver Spear? Whatever. It's this guy. You know who he is. The other unit, yeah, I think it is Silver Spear, or Silver Spar, or whatever. So, I'm getting blasted by the Union Navy. And I'm doing my damnedest to knock this gun unit out, because 640 some odd 100 artillerymen probably means it's, 600 is probably 26 guns, give or take. It's a shitload. Long story short, it's a shitload. It's a lot of artillery. I want it gone. So even if it's 6-pounders, even if it's 12-pound howitzers and they're not very effective, I want them gone. I have a bad enough time in this battle with the freaking ironclads that if you can get rid of that artillery and then prevent the Union artillery that's currently supporting the Hornet's Nest, which, by the way, tactically no longer matters, the thought process is then that this battle becomes much easier. Fortunately for the Union, unfortunately for the Confederacy, Silver Spear's artillery unit is able to retreat behind the cover of Miller's brigade, and Miller provides punishing rifle volleys combined with the shockingly and frighteningly accurate artillery fire of the Union Navy. I bitched enough in the previous video about the ironclads, and you'll see them in action here. And you know, the tactical advice that I kept on getting was, use the Allied troops to absorb the artillery fire. Like, bro, that doesn't work for 3 hours. It works fine for taking the landing and for trying to keep the Union out, but it does not work for 3 hours. Yeah, again, I'm sure there's plenty of room for improvement. We're on version number 8 of this battle, so at this point in time, I pretty much just wanted to be done with it. So, aggressive Confederate troops, realizing they're not going to get the artillery and they're not going to eject Miller, begin to consolidate their position and attempt to fall back. Trabue and his brigade appear to be kind of holding the door open for the remainder of the Confederate troops to move into the position, while Legendary Fiasco's troops fight a fighting withdrawal on the river front, trying to maximize the number of kills that they can earn. Bragg's command continues to interpose itself between the Union troopers in and around the Hornet's Nest before so allowing Legendary Fiasco soldiers to get in position. There is a problem in that eventually those guys in and around the Hornet's Nest are going to realize the jig is up, and they're going to come. They're going to come for me. Let's put it that way. So, I mean, right now things look pretty good for the Confederacy, right? Like, things are looking okay. We've got a growing number of forces in and around the area. Yeah, I kind of have blinders on about getting that artillery unit. I understand that. That's me. I own that particular truism. I'm also trying to shatter, if possible, the Union right command, because there's only like 3 brigades left, and they're all under strength pretty significantly. So I've got blinders on with regard to this artillery. I want to get it, because now Miller's out of position. 5th Infantry's drawn Miller way out of position. And again, these guys come screaming in out of nowhere, and they're really determined to make contact. And, man, the game gods must have taken mercy on me or something, because somewhere in here, Miller finally realizes, oh, you know what? We're really out of position. Like, really out of position. And he stops at the worst possible place for him, right in the middle of that road, and right in the intersection of a bunch of Confederate units who are coming up, finally getting kind of online to kind of consolidate our gains in and around the Pittsburgh Landing flag. But I'm not in position yet, and I'm still getting my troops ready for what I perceive in my mind is going to be imminent Union reinforcements. So I'm watching this battle now, and there is 100% the opportunity for me to have used these troops that are currently sitting around with twiddling their thumbs, watching the road. That we'll say Confederate cavalry is telling Legendary Fiasco Union troops are coming down right now. And they did, and they have in previous playthroughs, immediately teleported on the battlefield. But for whatever reason, they don't do it right now. So there's an opportunity I'm watching. There's absolutely an opportunity for me to swing, 11th and 9th down and engage Miller, or wheel with 7th and engage Miller on every possible flank, and just get him out of there, take him out. I charge him with Jackson, and I figure, let's just do as much damage as we can before he finally does kind of pop out to the side of the formation. Just 2-star units are a real problem, and that's great. It's pretty effective, too. And then I use this opportunity. I'm like, well, we have Jackson. Let's go ahead and advance. And again, consolidate our position and try and widen our positional advantage on the battlefield, and see if we can't continue to advance and prevent the Confederates Union from getting any good positioning on the battlefield. I want to make sure that I, as much as is possible, am maximizing my terrain advantage and minimizing their potential angles of approach. I accept and understand that I'm not going to be able to just brick wall and hold in place. I get that. I know that there's no chance for me to really destroy them like that. But what I can do is slow them down so much and tire them out and weaken them and degrade their force such that when they finally do get to wherever they're going, there's nothing left. And or what's left is exhausted and poorly led, and we've killed their officer, and they don't have a general, and there's no artillery support. That's number one rule for me, is get rid of the artillery support, especially in this instance. And I get it. Direct rifle fire on Silverware, Spear, Raber, whatever his name is not the way that I should be trying to take out the cannon. I understand that. I'm trying to get counter battery units online. I'm still consolidating my position in and around the flag, and I'm also still convinced I'm seconds away from an entire division showing up on my back flank, and so I need to have troops in place to counter that. And again, they don't materialize, so that's on me for holding these troops in a more cautious manner than maybe I should. because I think they're going to be here faster or sooner than they are. What's working out really well, however, from the Confederate perspective at, 3 o'clock on 6 April, is that the Confederates enjoy a major terrain advantage, and here's the Corps. So the Corps shows up around 3 o'clock. The division, so the Confederates are feeling pretty confident and secure in their holding of Pittsburgh right around 3. The first warning of the impending attack is 1st Ranger sends a desperate courier to 4th Infantry, who sends one down the line to 2nd Ranger, finally informs Legendary Fiasco of the expected Union division has finally showed up. Unfortunately, to do this, 1st Ranger gets just charged. They're out of position. They're too far forward. There's, it sucks. Realizing that Confederate troops can't effectively answer the ironclads in the river, absent absolute battlefield domination, Fiasco cedes the eastmost portion of the entrenchments and gives ground with 4th, realizing that his forward pickets can't begin to hold an entire overstrength Union division like that. But a battlefield task force composed of 1st Rifles, 14th Infantry, 11th Infantry, and 9th Infantry, as well as 2nd supporting, is quickly assembled and launched into an aggressive flank counterattack, hopefully spoiling the Union position. It is successful. And that would be the end of the story for Pittsburgh Landing, if it wasn't for the fact that a 2nd Union division arrives 20 minutes later along the riverside, led by Ammon's Brigade. Ammon's Brigade, inexplicably, 1 year into the war, are 3-star veterans who have apparently fought, they're just the transfers from all the Marines who fought at, Tripoli, are elite, extremely well-trained, aggressive, melee-oriented grenadiers, and then he's supported by, I want to say, 2 brigades of just, riflemen, fusiliers, whatever you want to say. The Confederate command is understandably shaken, under attack from the knife edge of its offensive, from 2 different sides of fresh, large formations of troops who are thankfully not well supported with artillery. The Confederate command rapidly needs to rearrange itself to meet this new threat. And what it does is, the first thing it does is it attacks the troops in the open. These are the troops that I have a chance of pushing off into the swamp and destroying against the river and that kind of thing. The second thing it does is it collapses its flank to the south in order to bring more troops to the point of decision. The holding action, successful though it mostly is at this juncture, is not going to destroy the Union Army, and it's certainly not going to win the battle. So, Bragg and Fiasco combine many of their troops and push north to join the battle in and around the fighting at Pittsburgh Landing. Confederate troops utilize excellent battlefield position, firing from covered position in the woods against Union troops mostly in the open, and again, well supported by artillery and flanking fires, and again, small Confederate brigades mutually supporting each other with crosswise lanes of fire, are able to overwhelm significant numerical disadvantages against the Union forces, even though they launch themselves into an aggressive series of attacks. The Union bleeds this day. Canister, rifle volleys, officers' pistols, NCOs, you name it. These units bleed, and they fall back ragged from the attack again and again. Serried ranks of blue uniformed soldiers march up the field. You can almost time the Confederate volleys by where the perfectly arrayed lines of Union soldiers fall. And yet the attack continues. Thorpe's men briefly entered the line of trenches around the Confederate position, using the cover there for seeking the superior cover. But his position is wildly exposed from multiple directions. If success is generally being found on the Confederate left, the Confederate right is not experiencing anything close to that. The holding action around Shiloh Church and the Hornet's Nest is continuing to try and consolidate, doing a fighting withdrawal as best as possible to bring more and more troops to where they actually matter in and around Pittsburgh Landing. Ammon's brigade launches himself, as is his fashion apparently, into a supremely effective and aggressive attack, seemingly mindless as to the casualties he endures on the way in. However, such is the skill of Ammon's 4,000 plus, I guess now it's smaller, such is the skill of Ammon's troops that they are able to brush aside any Confederate resistance until they tire themselves out on the attack. Yeah, it's 2,000 guys. Until they tire themselves out on the attack and receive massed fire from multiple directions. On the north and left, the Union launched themselves into another attack, desperately seeking a flank, desperately seeking a weak part in the Confederate line. And Fiasco, having had plenty of advance warning of the attack of this corps, or this division, the general of which I don't know, seems ready, and his position doesn't really expose a sufficiently weak place with which to launch an attack. And so the Union attacks are checked time and time again. And as more and more reinforcements from the Union South or Confederate South come online to extend their flank again and again against the Union attacks, ultimately the Union forces associated with the North and West Division are sent into the river, continuously firing back. They're sent back from their attack. Again, in stark contrast to all of this, the Union attack north and east of their position in and around Pittsburgh Landing continues to find more or less unmitigated success, as long as it's not exhausting itself in the attack. Another brigade launches itself into another attack. 4 Confederate brigades meet it, all small, all experienced, and all of them not up to the challenge. 5th Infantry surrenders. Overwhelmed, it retreats off the map under Union Guard. My guys are fighting tooth and nail. Everywhere I look, my position is under aggressive, desperate attack. And it makes sense. From a broader out-of-universe or out-of-game, in-universe perspective, the Union commander in this particular instance has absolutely no choice but to launch everything he's got. A no-holds-barred, aggressive attack. Because if the Confederates control the landing, the entire offensive into Tennessee is at risk. The entire offensive in the Union Center, the Western campaign, is at risk. And Confederate dominance in and around the Mississippi will remain unquestioned for the time being until the Union can launch itself into another attack. Union commander in this instance has no choice but to launch these desperate, aggressive attacks that are going to cost his command considerably. But if he can eject me from this position, which, by the way, he will do, he can theoretically keep the lines of supply open, and however battered his army is, he will have access to reinforcements from Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, parts of Kentucky, parts of parts of Tennessee and Missouri. Similarly, the Confederates know they need to win it here. They know if we don't win here, there's a corps of troops that would have been under Grant, but he's been killed. Not that his clone won't take the field at some point in time later in the battle, later in the war. So we'll say Grant's been ran off the battlefield wounded or something, right? The Confederates know that if they don't win here, and decisively, they lose a key node of their defense, of their command of one of the major rivers in the area. I don't think it's the Mississippi. I think it's probably the Ohio River, right? But that doesn't seem. I think the Ohio River is farther north than this because the Ohio River borders Kentucky. So this would have to be something else. So some major river, and I'm sure. I'll bet you anything they tell you in the damn briefing that I skipped over because I played this battle so many freaking times. The aggression is sad, but it makes sense. The blood loss is sad, but in this instance it makes sense. This is a battle for the very future of the survival of both of these nations. My troops are doing their hardest to hold on, tooth and nail. My objective is to make it to the microsecond when both of the following victory conditions have been accomplished. Victory condition 1. I have seen and can see on my screen a green check mark next to the word capture Pittsburgh Landing. The second victory condition, without which this battle must keep going, is that where it right now tells you how long I have to fight, there's a finish button. If neither of those victory conditions are met, I will keep fighting until they are, no matter the casualties. This army cannot survive day 2. We must eject the Union from Pittsburgh Landing today. We must check their advance and end this offensive now, or we're not going to do it tomorrow. This army is too battered, too beaten, and too small to fight that kind of a battle. And so, here comes the first attack on the center, on Pittsburgh Landing. Union troops engage and enter the trench works around Pittsburgh Landing, which for some reason the Confederates are unwilling or unable to use. We'll say that they are too brave, and they think trenches are, a weaker man's defensive breastwork. Maybe they're unwilling to enter a thing called breastworks because it offends their sensibilities. I've got no idea why I can't use the damn trenches. Not that I'm really entirely certain that I want to in this instance. They're okay trenches, actually. Like, if you're playing on the Union side, they're okay. They're not great. They're okay. Support them properly and you should be fine. But Union troops enter the breastworks around Pittsburgh Landing and are immediately ejected as a result of enfiladed fire. The task group associated with the northwest flank successfully routes the Union command, and it, instead of routing north and off the map up the road it came, decides instead, loses all battlefield cohesion. Perhaps a lucky shot has killed the Union task group commander because there is no general seen on the screen. No one of brigadier or higher riding a horse and so forth. We'll say the battlefield commander here is a lieutenant colonel. Lucky Confederate shot has killed the lieutenant colonel. The command and control apparatus that exists in that force panics and simply says to run. The men do, directly away from the threat. No real thought given, apparently, to where they're going to retreat, how they're going to get away, and the Confederates, in one tiny portion of the line, are actually able to accomplish their historical goal for this battle, and that's push the Union into the flank with their back against a river and gun them down, or force them to surrender. Now, this being a game, they don't surrender. They just fight this out and just die. But, hey, it is what it is. However, all is far, far, far from rosy in the Confederate Army. This battle is still very much up in the air, and despite the fact that I don't have Recon 4 to tell you what the relative strengths are, I would imagine it's probably pretty still fairly blue. Although, more even than you'd think. Because I feel like I have just barely enough troops that I'm always just a little bit undercommitted everywhere. Union troops in the Hornet's Nest, the Southern Command under General Murmur, have finally realized that the Confederates have no intention of engaging them in and around the Hornet's Nest and have begun an aggressive attempt to expand north, having finally gotten word from a courier that the Confederates have captured Pittsburgh Landing. The import of that location being captured by the Confederates is not lost on the Union commander in and around the Hornet's Nest, and he makes the decision on the spot to abandon the Hornet's Nest and launch an aggressive offensive towards Pittsburgh Landing. This offensive is successful almost immediately in forcing the exhausted Confederate fighters in and around Bragg's exhausted Confederate fighters, more or less cordoning off those troops from from Hornet's Nest, and they have to give ground almost immediately. Now, part of that is the fault of me, the player. This is the fault of Battlefield Commander Legendary Fiasco. Fiasco has sent messengers again and again and again, seconding portions of Bragg's command to the north to support his efforts in the north at Pittsburgh Landing. Bragg, understanding the battlefield reality that Pittsburgh Landing is the fight that truly matters, and that Legendary Fiasco has battlefield command here, has continued to accede to the request, destroying or honeycombing his command. More and more of Bragg's troops have gone north to help the fighting, and the Ironclads, the Navy this day is the true winner for the Union, the Ironclads have continued to exert or demand a truly disgusting toll of life. Once gigantic Confederate brigades, Trabue, for example, used to be 4,000 men or near enough to it, are skeletons of their former size, blasted to smithereens by big Navy guns. Confederate troops successfully pin Union forces in the swamp region to the west of Pittsburgh Landing and are able to erect a barrier, a force barrier, a force field, preventing them from retreating further north. No. Confederate troops, typically not part of the main engagement, reconnaissance soldiers, are able to join in the force, preventing Union troops from advancing or retreating to the north, and as a result, the encircled Union defenders, aware of their likely fate, grimly set about the purpose of ensuring the Confederates pay dearly for every inch of Union ground they claim. Finally, Confederate troops are able to mass enough numbers against Horn's brigade to eject him from his position north of the Confederate position in and around Pittsburgh Landing, or Horan perhaps. His brigade has resisted a truly phenomenal amount of effort from the Confederate Army to eject him from the position. And generally speaking, the state of the Army is one of tense nervousness and just holding on for dear life. Fiasco realizes that his command is crumbling around him at every angle, with the exception of the flank on the north and west. His command is being pressed. Fiasco realizes he can't win this battle all day. And as much as Bragg is doing his absolute damnedest to fight a fighting withdrawal, he's simply outgunned and outmaneuvered. And by the nature of the fact that I, the player, am not paying as much attention to the South, he's also outplayed. Desperate to provide enough men to trip the perception of possession in the Confederates' favor, i.e. trip the flag. More and more and more troops move to the north. But the Navy continues to exact a destructive toll. General Bartow, long one of Fiasco's closest and most trusted advisors, is either mortally wounded or just severely wounded by shrapnel from a Navy cannon. Depriving another Confederate unit of a vital unit commander. The Confederacy has fought on this battle despite the loss of a division commander early in the battle, and the damage to the command and control architecture of the Army cannot be understated. We're fighting tooth and nail here. And I don't have the flag. And I don't really have a great deal of need to push for it until I know there's about half an hour left in the game. I want to wipe up as much of this force to the north and west as much as I can, because I really perceive that I desperately need those troops online now. I need them online as soon as possible because I just need their bodies. I need their bodies and their muskets. I need them killing or fighting or holding some portion of the line. I'm doing everything I can to try and trip that flag for two reasons. One, I think that gunning this stuff out with the Union in the woods now is not really a good idea. The rate of exchange is not one that's particularly in my favor. Breckinridge is doing his damnedest to keep the door open for me in the south and tie up Union troops in a portion of the battlefield that doesn't really matter. And as much as I talk about, pulling from Bragg's command and the inevitable effect that it has on kind of weakening his position, and that's all true and accurate, Bragg's soldiers, as much as I bitched about them being ineffective on the shooting game, they do a damn good job and pay dearly for it in holding the Union back long enough and in drawing as many of his forces as they do away from the flag. Because if they were just allowed to sort of mass in and around the flag, I don't know if I'd ever be able to blast them off of it to get to the flag. So as it stands, Bragg is working and doing great work simply by drawing a division plus of soldiers away from the flag. That's all he has to do is to be effective in that role. It's frustrating to watch your command melt entirely, as far as I can tell, at the hands of that ironclad. Units, I've watched, I think, 3 units now shatter thanks to fire from the ironclad. And because I think Pond just bit it up there on the northern command, or northern segment of the battlefield. And I'm doing my damnedest to try and, secure the line. I need that flag. So the Confederates make one last desperate push around 5 o'clock to capture the flag. And if they can hold the flag before the sun goes down, the thought process is the Union will have to give the field. And they will. They will have exhausted their supplies. They will have exhausted their ability to keep fighting. And Confederate reconnaissance cavalry has determined that at that point in time, the Navy will be out of shells and will have to withdraw its gunboats from the fight. At which point in time, the remaining Union defenders, if they have not secured Pittsburgh Landing, will be in a truly precarious position, cut off from retreat to the north, cut off from supplies in the river. And once Confederate artillery is able to emplace, especially naval defense batteries currently held behind the lines, they'll be able to prevent the Union from advancing with more gunboats. And so it really comes down to the next couple of minutes. This is what decides the battle. My command is battered, bloodied, beaten. I'm doing my damnedest to get the ironclads to shoot units like Trabue and Pond, because as much as we might get to keep more guns of theirs if they live, frankly, it's more important to me that my guys live. Bragg's command is absolutely annihilated. And Bragg, famous for the successful outmaneuvering, now infamous in history for successfully outmaneuvering Union forces in and around the Hornet's Nest will also be known as Bloody Bragg for the destruction of his command at Shiloh. Later in his dispatches and reports to Richmond, he'll say, "I came to Shiloh with an army, I left with a division." And it's not inaccurate. Fiasco's troops are also equally bloodied. The Union, no less bloodied in the course of this battle, by the way, suffers major casualties, and we'll take a look at those figures later on. Essentially, out of character, I spend the majority of the back half of this battle trying to secure as much as possible my command's position in and around this flag, and everything that I'm doing towards the tail end of the battle is geared entirely towards meeting the win condition of green check mark and finish button. I'm willing to roadblock or road speed bump as much of my troops as I need to, in order to get that objective met. I have not been super duper great with the supply wagon. I have been doing my damnedest to keep it moving. I've been doing my damnedest to keep supporting the Allied troops, because honestly, if they're not getting enough supply, especially the cannons, even if they're not good cannons, if they're not getting enough supply, they're not going to be able to do their job, which is to say, trade moderately efficiently with the Union. I don't need 5-to-1 kill ratios or anything crazy like that. I need like maybe 2-to-1, and I'll be happy. As long as they're trading and holding the Union back, that's really all I care about. Hazen launches himself into another attack. This one seemingly out of spite, because it's not even towards the objective. Towards Trabew's men. Trabew, the brigade that initially attacked the flag, was able to destroy one of the artillery units. So theoretically, at least in the real world scenario, maybe Hazen and the commander of that artillery unit were friends, and Hazen just has it out for Trabew. As soon as he saw Trabew's flag, that was it. But that ill-advised attack right into the teeth of Confederate artillery and supporting infantry fires is quickly sent back. And me, the player, is very excited as the minutes tick down in this moment. I think I might be able to get out of this battle without, suffering as heavily as I worried I might. Confederate troops can feel the day coming to a close. The sun is lower in the sky. The level of fire from the Union artillery, the Union gunboats, seems to have redoubled in its efforts. And while that is initially, in the short term, quite painful, Confederate soldiers perceive, right, wrong, or indifferent, that might mean the Navy knows it's almost out of shells. However, Union troops wait, gathering their energy, gathering their weapons, coordinating an attack, and preparing for one last major push on the imaginary battle flag in the middle of Pittsburgh Landing. And much to the chagrin of me, the player, they're successful in tripping the flag. They take huge casualties on the way in. Gibson is honestly just kind of a body block. Hazen, again, streaming out of nowhere. This guy's more conditioned than, a bodybuilder. He streams out of nowhere and is met by 3 different Confederate brigades, as well as supporting artillery, and doesn't seem to care. I'm finally able to cancel the charge just barely before Hazen makes the wood line. He's still almost certainly going to have some cover, but not enough. The frustrating thing is the Union attack on the flag is short-lived and not terribly effective, but that momentary, brief moment of success is enough to send a cheer across the Union line, and for a while their willingness, their morale, their ability to fight is buffeted. Confederate troops almost immediately recapture the landing, and the Stars and Bars, or the battle flag of the Army of Northern Virginia, which looks nothing like the Stars and Bars, goes over the breastworks one more time. The battle, it seems, is fated to continue on for at least 19 more minutes. Miller, realizing that this is still very much up in the air, launches his troops against the Confederate troops. Interestingly, Miller's not reaching for the objective, but rather is seeking to destroy Union or Confederate soldiers. And ultimately, while he gives up the attack, does take up a great firing position in that block of woods, which is super duper frustrating. Gibson, again, largely body blocking in the open there. His command is falling apart around him, but with the way that the command radius around that flag seems to be structured, I need to keep someone near it or the Union will trip it again. I have a suspicion, I think that they're ultimately successful in tripping it one more time, and we have to go back into another 20-minute fighting phase before we're finally able to sort of end it. Hillerson's unit engages First Rifles and receives a nasty surprise. Close-range canister fire, and the fact that while their name might be First Rifles, the men under that unit's command know a thing or two about the cold, hard steel, and he is sent running. And yeah, the Union does trip the flag one more time. Great. And we keep on fighting. This is essentially a game of back and forth with the flag. I had wanted to expand my command area to the little houses here south of the flag, and then that copse of trees where Miller is, in order to force them to come through me versus just being able to walk towards me and tripping the flag. Unfortunately, thanks to the ironclads, I was never able to really develop that position. And that would end up costing the Confederates time on the battlefield again and again. And time means casualties. The Union is still apparently able to fight despite, no visible supply lines and an increasing number of shattered units. But it's not like the Confederates aren't also having units quit the field. We get to the I would say closing moments of the battle, but we still got a little bit left. Mass Confederate fires, probably going to eject Miller here before too long, and the deciding moment in the battle is when the Confederates are able to develop a battlefield position actually south of Pittsburgh Landing, not on actually Pittsburgh Landing itself. But they're able to develop that position in such a way that they're able to significantly affect flanking fire on Union troops attacking the objective. And this makes those attacks harder and harder for the Union. Supported by Bragg's big artillery units and the fact that a number of Union units seem to have quit the field, we're finally able to tip the scales ever so gently in the Confederate balance point. But still got to hold it for 19 minutes. And the Union takes it back again. We do this just again and again. This fight for the flag, like this battle, is just this constant back and forth on this damn flag. Here he is one more time, Ammon coming in. Time seems to slow on the field of battle as seemingly every gun in Fiasco's command, well aware of the danger that Ammon's brigade poses to his position, turns to try and support. First Rifles hold till the last possible second, desperately attempting to get a volley off at close range. Realizing they're not going to, however, they brace for the inevitable melee. And then, inexplicably in military history, Ammon pauses, seemingly to send his own volley in before launching himself into melee, and the devastating counterfire is enough to turn Ammon's brigade. First Rifles is majorly bloodied in the attack. The initial volley from Ammon is quite painful, but they're not called First Rifles for nothing. And continued, disciplined, high volume, quick reloaded fire from First Rifles sends Ammon back. And canister fire from massed Confederate artillery punishes him gravely for the offensive. Somewhere in here, I've got to take that flag back. I don't know when I do it. We do manage a win. I'll be damned if I know when or how I do it. But we do. Able to pour supporting fire from an angle, flanking the Union position. First Rifles is able to turn the Union flank. Now, where once there was a position of safety for Union units recovering from the nth attack on the flag, now First, Hudson, and Hubbard are pouring massed fire into their flanks, sending units retreating back, away from the flag. Breckinridge, having heroically fought a rearguard action for the duration of the day's fighting, doing everything in his power to tie up and hold back Union units with dwindling resources, weakened men, and honestly, very little supply support from the broader Army of Northern Virginia, is one of the heroes of this battle. The men that he under his command constantly outnumbered and frequently undersupported or not supported at all are able to slow and tie up huge portions of the Union Army, and still the fighting is desperate to the last moment. Still, Confederate units are teetering on the edge of routing themselves, simply taking too many losses to keep fighting, and Breckinridge is fighting a command nearly 10 times his size, and only because of the supreme battlefield and positional advantages under his command is able to hold, and even then, just barely. This battle is one of heroism on both sides. The daring and brash attacks of Ammon's brigade, of Hazen's brigade, the impressive, aggressive thrusts and defense in and around the Hornet's Nest, bloody Bragg's infamous left hook, which bypassed the Hornet's Nest entirely, legendary fiascos, pincher thrust like a rapier stabbed directly into the heart of the Union Army, and of course the desperate last stand of the First Rifles as they threw Ammon's brigade back. Many heroes were born, and unfortunately very many of them didn't make it to the end of the battle. The Navy, also very successful here, inflicting grievous wounds on the Confederate Army. It's just shy of 7 p.m. on 6 April, and Confederate recon and early pickets or forward deployed skirmishers report a major and what appears to be organized Union aggressive offensive on the flag one more time is massing, and unfortunately the beleaguered, exhausted, still poorly supported, still roughly supplied Confederate units are doing their damnedest to meet and check the attack. Artillery continues to pour fire after fire after fire, but units can only take so much damage. And even though the Navy seems predominantly focused on targeting troop formations, shrapnel and overflow damage and so forth and so on does damage or does kill the occasional artillerist. Kill, wound, or maim the occasional artillerist. And worse, spike the occasional gun The Confederates came to this battle with hundreds of cannon, dozens at least, and the Union that many more. Artillery is generally considered to be one of the safer military combat arms professions, one where the soldier is able to fight most of the battle behind the lines. But truly, this has been a rough battle to be a redleg. Worse, one would think, to be a cavalryman. Most of the cavalry in this battle has fought dismounted, has fought and been killed. Every unit except for one has shattered. I think there only is one. Shiloh is one of the battles that ushers in the modern era and suggests that the day of horse and sword may be coming to an end. However, as we close on 7 p.m., the Union attack never materializes. Confederate musketry continues to batter and bruise and beaten the Union command. And the men, unwilling to launch themselves in one more attack. The AI mostly defeated. Artillery has seemingly been wiped out. Union artillery has seemingly been wiped out. One last great hope for the Union Army is Welsh's brigade, seemingly fresh from, I guess, defending a portion of the line that never got attacked, moves towards the flag. Welsh's offensive, however, is almost immediately beset by mass Confederate artillery, counter battery units, counter infantry units, howitzer units, horse artillery units, batter him from every direction and every kind of shell, whether it's effective or not. The intent entirely to convince Welch that maybe today's not the day. And ultimately, at 7:03 on 6 April, the guns of the Navy go silent. The gunboats ultimately retreat, quitting the field. And as a result, the Union Army becomes immediately aware that the game's up. The Confederates are too exhausted to cheer. Those men left at the end of the battle weep, not for their losses, though they certainly feel grief about that. They weep from a combined sense of sorrow and shock, but they made it, and that's why they cry. Shiloh has been one of the hardest battles of this game I've ever played. It is not a victory that I think is one that would be, for the records or anything like that. My army is bruised, but not destroyed. I've already built it for 1st Winchester. It's a good force. But if we were to consider this to be out of universe or out of game, historically that would have been one of the most tight-fought battlefield draw but strategic victories I can ever imagine. Both forces fought well, but control of that river would have been decisive, at least in that regional portion of the conflict, and inevitably would have honestly been worth the cost of life to whichever side won, and would have absolutely changed the course of the war. The Union likely would not have had the security to launch the 7 Days campaign in and around Richmond, likely having to earmark significant portions of their forces to launch a secondary attack in the direction of Shiloh along that river to secure their rear, because the Confederates, they wanted to try and attack Cincinnati. They wanted to try and attack Indianapolis. They wanted to try and bisect the Union, utilize the Mississippi as a way to cut the Union off from the resources out west and starve the manufacturing in the east. Now, these were lofty goals that I think would have been very difficult to accomplish, even if they had been successful at Shiloh. But, man, what a fight. Guys, this is going on long enough. I am excited to see where this campaign keeps going. We made it past the hump of Shiloh. My army has been absolutely wrecked, but the Confederacy will recover. And we're going on, and I'll see you guys in the next battle for 1st Winchester. I have it queued up. It's ready to go. The army's built and ready for it. I'll do a quick camp vid because it's been a minute since I've taken a look at the units in the camp, and then I'll record the battle itself. I'm still trying to figure it out. Some of the tricks and tactics that work in the vanilla game don't really work in the rebalance mod. And I'm learning that the more I play this, at this level of difficulty, the more I'm going to have to experiment between legendary and the rebalance mod itself. A lot of the things that kind of work as core assumptions to my gameplay, I have to stop, reevaluate them, and try and approach these battles in a different manner, which is definitely kind of cool and new and exciting. So, with that being said, thanks for sticking this out. I'm sorry for the delay from one episode to the next, and I should be able to stick to the more regular once a week for Winchester. So, without further ado, this is Fiasco. I hope you guys are having a wonderful August or September or whenever it is you watch this, and I will see you in the next one. But this is Fiasco. Until then, signing out.